Paul got approved, $450,000. The mortgage broker smiled when she said it, like she was giving Paul good news, like this was something to celebrate. Paul nodded, tried to smile back, tried to feel successful, but something felt wrong. Not obviously wrong, quietly wrong. Paul makes $70,000 a year. He just got approved to borrow $450,000. That's 6.5 times his salary. The math doesn't feel right. But the bank says it's fine. The broker says it's normal. The real estate agent says it's doable. Everyone with a financial interest in Paul buying a house says Paul can afford it. So Paul starts looking at houses he's been approved for, but can't actually afford. Paul finds a house, 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, 1,400 square feet, built in 1998. The listing calls it a starter home. It costs $450,000. The kitchen counters are laminate. The carpet is beige and tired. The basement has wood paneling that hasn't been updated since the Clinton administration. The backyard is the size of a parking space. This is what Paul's approval buys. Not a dream home, not even a nice home, just a home, a structure, 4 walls and a roof. That costs more than Paul will earn in 6 years. Paul walks through it, tries to imagine living there, tries to feel excited. The agent is talking about the neighborhood, about the potential, about how lucky Paul is to find something in his price range. Paul isn't listening. He's doing math, mental math, the kind that makes your stomach tight. $450,000. He has $30,000 saved. That's not 20% down. That's 6.6%, which means PMI, private mortgage insurance, a monthly fee for not being wealthy enough. Paul didn't know that was a thing until this week. Now he knows it costs $250 a month. Just for being poor. Not poor, just not rich enough to avoid the poverty tax. The mortgage payment is $2,850 a month. Principal and interest at 6.5% for 30 years. That's just the start. Property taxes, $450 a month. Homeowners insurance, $280 a month. PMI, $250 a month. Maintenance budget, 1% of home value annually, $375 a month. Total monthly cost, $4,205. Paul makes $70,000 a year. After taxes, that's about $4,300 a month. The house would cost him $4,205. That leaves $95 for everything else. Groceries, gas, car payment, insurance, phone, internet, life, $95. Obviously, Paul can't do this. Obviously, this is insane. But the bank approved him, so something must be wrong with Paul's math. Except, it's not. The bank uses different math. Bank math says Paul can spend up to 43% of his gross income on debt. Gross income means before taxes, before Paul actually sees the money. 43% of $70,000 is $30,100 a year, $2,508 a month. The mortgage payment alone is $2,850. So even by the bank's generous standards, Paul is over. But the bank approved him anyway, because the bank's risk is different from Paul's risk. If Paul defaults, the bank takes the house. They're protected. Paul isn't. Paul does the math backward. If the house costs $4,205 a month, and housing should be 28% of gross income, then Paul needs to make $180,000 a year. Paul makes $70,000. He's $110,000 short. Even if Paul stretches to 35% of gross income, which financial advisors say is risky, he'd still need to make $144,000. He's $74,000 short. There's no version of this math where Paul can afford this house. Not comfortably, not sustainably, not without turning his life into a monthly panic about whether he can make the payment. But Paul knows people who bought houses, people who make what he makes, maybe less. They're doing it. So maybe Paul is just being too cautious. Maybe he's overthinking this. Maybe everyone feels this way and they just push through it. Except, Paul asked one of them, carefully, casually, "How's the house?" "It's good. Tight, but good." Tight. That word does a lot of work. Tight means they're barely making it. Tight means they can't afford furniture for 2 of the bedrooms. Tight means they're 1 car repair away from credit card debt. Tight means they're house poor, which is a nice way of saying they own a house they can't actually afford to live in. Paul doesn't want tight. He wants margin, space to breathe, room for mistakes, the ability to handle surprises without spiraling. But margin requires income Paul doesn't have, or a cheaper house. Paul looks at houses he can afford, actually afford, not approve for, afford. At 28% of his gross income, Paul can spend $1,633 a month on housing. Total housing cost, mortgage, taxes, insurance, maintenance, everything. Working backward, that means a house around $220,000. With 10% down, Paul looks at $220,000 houses. They exist, barely. They're far out, an hour commute, maybe more. They're small, 1,000 square feet, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom. They need work. New roof, updated electrical, floors that creak, walls that need paint, systems that are aging. These aren't starter homes. They're project homes, fixer-uppers, the kind of house that requires time, money, and skills Paul doesn't have. But they're what Paul can afford. If he wants to actually sleep at night, if he wants to save for retirement, if he wants to handle emergencies without panic, if he wants a life that isn't just working to pay for walls. The problem is, Paul doesn't want to live an hour away. He doesn't want a project. He doesn't want to tell people he bought a $220,000 house when everyone else is buying $450,000 houses. It feels like losing, like settling, like admitting he can't keep up. Even though keeping up means financial suicide, Paul's parents bought a house at his age. They mention this. Often, not meanly, just factually. We bought our first house when we were 28. Paul is 30. The implication hangs there. What his parents don't mention is that their house cost $89,000. Paul's dad made $32,000 that year. The implication hangs there. What his parents don't mention is that their house cost $89,000. Paul's dad made $32,000 that year. The house was 2.8 times his salary. Paul's house would be 6.4 times his salary. The math is completely different, but the expectation is the same. Paul's friends are buying, posting photos. New house, who dis? Keys in hand, fresh paint, empty rooms waiting to be filled. They look happy, successful, like adults. Paul wants to feel like that, like he's arrived, like he's on track. Renting feels temporary, like he's still figuring things out, like he hasn't quite made it yet. Even though renting is the financially smarter choice right now, even though buying a house he can't afford would be objectively stupid, the pressure isn't logical, it's social, cultural, emotional, and it's everywhere. Every family gathering, every conversation with friends, every Instagram post, every casual, "So when are you buying?" question. The pressure to buy isn't about what makes financial sense, it's about what makes social sense. And socially, renting at 30 feels like failing. Even when buying would be actual failure. Just slower, more expensive, with a mortgage attached. Paul imagines it, buying the $450,000 house, making it work somehow. Month 1, he makes the payment. Barely. His savings are gone. Down payment, closing costs, moving expenses, all of it. He has $1,200 in his account. That's supposed to be his emergency fund now. Month 3, the dishwasher breaks. Paul calls a repair guy, $380. Paul puts it on a credit card. He'll pay it off next month. Probably. Month 5. Car needs new tires, $650. Another credit card charge. The balance is growing. Month 7. Property tax bill arrives. It's higher than estimated. The county reassessed. Paul's escrow is short. He owes $800. He doesn't have it. Another card. Month 9. The AC stops working. Middle of summer. The repair quote is $2,800. Paul doesn't have it. The credit card is maxed. He opens a new card. 0% APR for 12 months. He tells himself he'll pay it off before the rate jumps. Month 12. Paul hasn't paid off anything. The minimum payments are $340 a month now, on top of the mortgage. On top of everything else, Paul is drowning, not dramatically, just constantly. A low-grade panic that never goes away, checking the account before buying groceries, hoping the check engine light isn't serious, avoiding dinners with friends because he can't afford to split the bill, living in a house he owns. That owns him. Being house poor isn't about being broke. It's about having a house and no life. Paul has equity, technically, $30,000 in a down payment, locked in a house he can't sell without losing money on closing costs and realtor fees. Paul has an asset that he can't access, can't use, can't benefit from, except on paper. Meanwhile, Paul can't save for retirement beyond the minimum, build an emergency fund, take a vacation, replace his aging car, go out without calculating the cost, buy furniture for the third bedroom, fix the fence that's falling apart, paint the walls that need it, afford hobbies, afford spontaneity, afford peace of mind. Paul owns a house. The house owns his life. Every decision is filtered through one question. Can we still make the mortgage? That's not wealth. That's a very expensive prison with property taxes. Paul doesn't buy the house. This isn't the fun ending. This isn't the inspiring story. Paul just doesn't buy it. He tells the realtor he needs more time. He tells his parents he's still looking. He tells his friends he's being picky. What he doesn't tell anyone is that he did the math, the real math, not the bank's math, not the everyone else is doing it math, the math where Paul actually has to live in the house and pay for it and survive it, and the math doesn't work. Paul keeps renting. The apartment is small, the walls are thin, the landlord is slow to fix things, but Paul's rent is $1,400 a month, everything included, no surprise maintenance, no property tax increases, no emergency repair bills, just $1,400, fixed, predictable, manageable. Paul saves the difference between what he pays in rent and what he'd pay for the house. $2,800 a month, every month, into investments, into his emergency fund, into actual wealth that he controls, that he can access, that isn't locked in drywall and foundation issues. In 5 years, Paul has $168,000 saved and invested. If he'd bought the house, Paul would have $30,000 in equity. Maybe, if the market didn't drop, if he didn't have to sell early, if everything went perfectly, plus $40,000 in credit card debt from all the emergencies he couldn't afford. Net worth, negative. Instead, Paul has options. He can buy a house when it makes sense, when he makes more, when prices stabilize, when he finds something he can actually afford, not just qualify for, afford, or Paul can keep investing, keep building wealth, keep having a life that isn't dominated by a mortgage payment, keep choosing freedom over equity. The bank doesn't care if Paul can afford the house. They care if Paul will make payments. For a while, long enough. If Paul defaults, they take the house, sell it, recover their money. Paul loses his down payment, his credit, his equity. The bank loses nothing. So the bank's definition of affordable is different from Paul's. The bank's risk is protected. Paul's isn't. The realtor doesn't care if Paul can afford the house. They care if Paul buys. Their commission is 3% of the sale price. On a $450,000 house, that's $13,500. They get paid when Paul signs, not when Paul successfully makes 30 years of payments, not when Paul builds actual wealth, when Paul buys. So affordable to them means, will you sign? Not, can you sustain this? The mortgage broker doesn't care if Paul can afford the house. They care if the loan closes. They get paid when the deal funds. Then they sell the loan to another bank and move on to the next customer. Paul's long-term financial stability isn't their problem. It's Paul's. Nobody in the transaction has an incentive to tell Paul the truth. The truth is expensive. The truth is uncomfortable. The truth is that most people can't afford the houses they're buying. They're just doing it anyway and hoping it works out. Hope isn't a strategy, it's a prayer. And prayers don't pay mortgages. Paul didn't buy the house everyone said he could afford. He gets questions about it. Still renting? Haven't found the right place yet? Waiting for prices to drop? Paul just nods. Doesn't explain. Doesn't justify. Doesn't defend a decision that's objectively correct. because defending it means admitting everyone else might be wrong, and people don't want to hear that. Not when they're house poor, not when they stretched, not when they're living the same financial stress Paul avoided. Paul's friends who bought, they don't talk about money anymore. They post pictures of their houses, their yards, their renovations. What they don't post, the credit card debt, the fights about money, the anxiety about making the payment, the regret. Social media shows the house. It doesn't show the cost. And the cost is everything. Paul has something they don't, not a house. Margin, the ability to handle surprise, to make choices, to save, to invest, to build wealth that isn't locked in an asset he can't access. Paul isn't winning some competition. He's just not losing one he was never supposed to enter. The game was rigged. The bank, the realtor, the broker, the culture, all of it designed to get Paul into a house, not to ensure Paul thrives, just to get him in. Paul opted out, not forever, just until the math works, until he makes more, until he can afford the house, not just qualify for it, afford it. There's a difference, and the difference is everything. Paul still looks at houses sometimes, just to see, to stay aware of the market, to remind himself why he's waiting. The houses haven't gotten cheaper, they've gotten worse, less for more. Paul doesn't feel like he's missing out anymore. He feels like he dodged something, a trap, a very expensive trap, wrapped in granite countertops and dream home language. Paul will buy eventually, when it makes sense, when the numbers work, when he can afford it without sacrificing everything else. Until then, Paul rents and builds wealth, real wealth, the kind you can use, not the kind that owns you. Thanks for watching. We'll check back in on Paul next time, another trap, another lesson. This is how money really works.